With us now, Chronic Hoosier. How are you, sir?
Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
You and me as well. Kevin Brockway here from CNHI is also. And last we spoke, the first and second rounds had not. See, last time we spoke, we hadn't even finished the first four in yet, I guess.
Yeah, they
So
were still
Indiana
waiting for
has,
that plane to fail them.
yeah, twice. Well, they had to sit twice, but Indiana has. They did get their first NCAA tournament win and made the field. Had to travel all the way out to Portland. Not enjoyable trip, but played a game St. Mary's team who was just a little bit too much on that last Thursday. But back into the tournament, which is the biggest thing for Indiana.
Yeah, it's several days now after the fact, and it's a lot of the emotion has kind of subsided there, where we maybe could take a step back and look at the bigger picture of the season. Obviously, it was a very ungraceful exit from the tournament the way they went out. But I looking back, as we said last week, the goal this whole season was always to get IU back into the tournament, and by the hair of their chinny chin chin, they made it. But that's a whole lot better than the alternative, if we're being totally honest. And I know a lot of people wanted to debate the merits of a first four invite as opposed to being directly entered into the field of 64. But at the end of the day, they earned it. They earned that ticket to Portland, and unfortunately, I think what we saw once we got there was the residue of a team that had played 5 games in 8 days and only 7 nights sleep in between them. Unfortunately, that night they missed came on the eve of their game out there, and they very much looked the part, and got a lot of slack for saying that's what they look like. That it was somehow making excuses. Don't get me wrong. There's a number of reasons why they lost that game, but not the least of which was they looked just completely emptied, just out of gas. So it was unfortunate they had to go that way, but I think it gives the program a whole lot to build on as they enter into Mike Woodson's first full off season, where he's going to be able to take this thing from start to finish and really hopefully install whatever his vision for the next step of Indiana basketball is going to be. But now we get to play the waiting game and sit here and wait for announcements to come out, letting us know who's going to be part of that team that returns next year.
Oh yeah, that's the fun part, Kevin. Is we'll be going through that and discussing that. But right now, the in not enjoying, but looking at what they were able to accomplish this year and why it's important. I mean, the recruiting class is already set and coming in, but there are guys that they're looking at for 23, and getting back into the tournament signals that yes, all right, this team is going in the right direction, and this is someplace where I want to be.
Yeah, and you want to develop some consistency with that, I think, Jim. And it would be nice to see them, springboard this and play a little better in the Big Ten. They're 9-11 last year. I think you'd want a winning record and a little bit of a higher finish in the Big Ten to make sure that you're not at that 12 seed where you're playing in Dayton and then having to fly and having to travel. And I think to Chronic's point too, this team relied so much on defense and there was no margin for error. And it was just, what I saw in Portland was a team that, for about the first 10, 12 minutes, I mean, you're up 18-13, you're defending really well against a pretty good St. Mary's team, and then just completely lost it on that end, being a step slow on everything, probably because of fatigue. It caught up to them from that mark on. So, and I'm sure the travel and playing so many games had something to do with it. And St. Mary's just really turned it on. And I think Randy Bennett's a pretty good coach too. He's done a good job over there with that program. And they gave UCLA a little bit of a game too in the round of 32 before falling. But that was a pretty darn good St. Mary's team they faced as well.
Yeah, I mean, and they were rested and ready to go, and there's a point in sit there lamenting that. The fact that Indiana's back in the tournament, that's the most important part for them, and as they move forward, and as Chronic mentioned, now comes the waiting game, who will stay and who will go. We know that 3 people have to go. just simply have to leave. Now, obviously, you've had Parker Stewart who went through senior day festivities. I think that he is gone. Race Thompson went through senior day festivities, and I believe that he is gone as well. So there will just be one other. And I mean, I don't think it's going to be a shock, whoever that person ends up being. And that's just if it's one, Chronic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is in this day and age, with the transfer portal, you really have no idea until everybody's basically made their commitments one way or another. I mean, this is a effectively a free for all. Rightly so. Let me add to when coaches and staffs and administrators are able to move freely to new opportunities. It's only fair that the players do, but that opens up this door now where everybody's kind of stuck in a holding pattern until everybody announces their intentions and the staff can kind of go from there. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's perhaps more than just one additional one than the two you added. And I'm not even sure that I do tend to agree. I think Parker's probably gone. Race, who knows? Who knows? And I'd said it previously, and I still think it holds true. That experience in the postseason, being able to go 2-1 in the Big Ten tournament, 1-1 in the NCAA tournament. Mike Woodson was able to finish with a winning record in the postseason this year. I don't think that's insignificant, as a lot of these guys are kind of making their way or their decisions forward here. Because when you look at what it landed Indiana in that position to begin with, why they wound up in the first four, their inability to close games that they could and should have won. They figured a lot of that out there in the closing weeks of the season. I think it started at Purdue, quite honestly. That time between we saw them lay an egg against Rutgers at home and the trip to West Lafayette, there was a buy-in on this team and a fight that came to the surface. And you saw it in the Michigan game, you saw it in the Illinois game, you saw it in the entire postseason, quite honestly, up until the tank was just empty out in Portland. But I think it's not insignificant what type of a taste that leaves in those guys' mouth, showing that they were able to get over that hump and close some games out, showing what they're capable of, and perhaps giving some guys a taste of what a next season with the Hoosiers could be. So I think that's all in play. And one of the things that I can't get away from right now as we talk about this brave new world of college basketball, let's not forget in the NIL era, for guys perhaps like Race who are maybe considering pro prospects, what opportunities might lie ahead for him. Race certainly isn't appearing on any NBA draft boards, but that's not to say he can't, follow the route of a Juwan Morgan and maybe get picked up on a two-way deal or a G League deal. The Hoosiers for Good NIL collective, from what I understand, is raising a not insignificant sum of money. It's going to give Indiana the opportunity to compete for some of these guys who are perhaps considering their professional prospects as it relates to what income may be available to them. And people need to recognize Indiana is now a bidder for those services because of NIL. And this is going to be the first time that we've ever seen it leveraged to this degree, where it's certainly going to have to factor in some of the decisions ahead for these guys as far as what they plan to do next year. Because if they're out there trying to capitalize on their income earning years in the game of basketball, this is going to be an era where you can now continue to do that right here in Bloomington, Indiana, playing for IU. So I'll be fascinated to see how that all shakes out. But make no mistake, that is certainly going to be something these guys are going to have to weigh in their decisions going forward.
Yeah, there's a new story out on the Hoosier.com from national recruiting, basketball recruiting director Rob Cassidy. Talks about eulogizing 6 high-profile teams that exited the NCAA tournament. Iowa was the first one, the cause of death, poor shooting. Kentucky was the next one, cause of death, poor peacock attack. Indiana, cause of death, fatigue. So very apt in that. But the fact that they're talking about Indiana in that in that moment is much better than what it has been the last few years, and especially with these guys coming in, that's going to be a difference maker for this team. A lot of the misfortunes, Kevin, shooting. You got guys like CJ Gunn in, lack of extra point guard play. You've got guys like Jalen Hood-Schifino coming in, guys that I think are going to play right away. I'm not saying they're going to start, but they're going to hit the floor right away. Caleb Banks might as well. I've got to get more, see him more, but those first two, they're going to be on the floor without question.
Yeah, I think that Hood-Schifino especially will be very intriguing. It'll be very interesting to see if Xavier Johnson decides to come back too, and if they can play off one another together in the backcourt. And obviously, we saw Xavier make some strides, particularly at the end of the season. Hood-Schifino is a guy that, Jim, I know you saw down in Florida, and is a guy that can definitely play make. He's got great court vision, which would certainly help. And especially if a guy like Trayce Jackson-Davis comes back, like if you had a point guard that could really, really find him in transition or on, in half-court sets, I think that would make his life a lot easier finishing around the basket.
And you just mentioned something that Hoosiers for good. I'm not going to be shocked if Trayce Jackson-Davis is back at Indiana next year, Chronic, simply because of Hoosiers for good.
Well, and he is certainly one of those players that it's going to have a significant impact in how he weighs that decision. Trayce is currently projecting low second round, outside of the second round on some of the draft boards I've seen. Now, I think he did put on a heck of a showing in the postseason this year, but for a guy that's fringe like that, as it relates to the NBA prospects, there's no guarantee. Just because you get picked up by a G League team, that's just your opportunity to go get the crap kicked out of you by some really grizzled vets. So from a money standpoint, a guy like Trayce can actually stand to make more money staying in Bloomington than were he to perhaps go overseas or perhaps pick up a G League contract right now. With the prospect, as Woodson pitched him last summer or spring, of improving his game, of improving his draft stock. But if it just comes down to a dollars and cents standpoint now, Indiana's going to find itself in the driver's seat with a lot of these players, because market value for somebody like Trayce in the pro ranks, be it G League or the Europe, that doesn't necessarily translate here. His value at Indiana from a monetary standpoint is probably considerably higher, simply because he's so valuable to Indiana's success currently. And now they're going to be able to pay him commensurate with that value through the NIL efforts. So not insignificant either. He picked up an NIL deal with Pennzoil right before the end of the season. It was announced, and it would be hard pressed to imagine why a business would be putting money in this kid's pockets for a 2, 3, 4 week return if he had indicated to them that he was going to be throwing his hat in the ring for whatever lies next outside of Indiana. So certainly reading some tea leaves here, but what we know, what's concrete, Hoosiers for Good is going to be able to make a significant impact in a lot of these kids' decisions as they're trying to decide what's in their best interest going forward. And often this is a dollars and cents standpoint, because their days are limited and nothing is promised in the future. So guaranteed contracts, cash in hand. We all know the expression, money talks and BS walks. Indiana now has the money to do quite a bit of talking when it comes to their ability to sway kids to stay or come play for Indiana University.